A millionaire CEO got stuck in an elevator. With a single mom, what she said left him speechless. The elevator stopped between floors. Marcus Hale had less than 3 minutes to decide whether he would miss the most important meeting of his career or listen to a stranger he didn't care about. He didn't know her name, didn't know why she looked nervous, didn't know she was walking into a job interview that could change her life. And he definitely didn't know that one sentence from her would stay with him for years. Across from him, she held a thin folder, trying not to show how much this moment mattered. She had no idea the man beside her was the CEO of the company she was about to walk into. If you believe in compassion and the quiet strength of ordinary people, take a moment to like and subscribe. Stories like this remind us how one small act can change everything. Marcus Hale leaned back against the mirrored wall of the elevator, jaw tight, eyes flicking again to his phone as if the signal might magically return. His morning had been planned down to the minute, every conversation scheduled, every decision rehearsed before it happened. Being stuck here wasn't just inconvenient. It felt like losing control, and control was something he rarely let slip. The woman beside him stayed quiet, not trying to fill the silence the way most people did. Her name, he didn't know yet. What he noticed instead was how carefully she held that folder, not squeezing it in panic, just keeping it close like it mattered. She looked tired, but not defeated. The kind of tired that comes from waiting too long, not from giving up. Marcus glanced at her again, this time longer, not because he was curious, but because the stillness felt strange. Most people complained when plans fell apart. She didn't. She just stood there, breathing slow, eyes forward, as if she'd already accepted that this delay was out of her hands. That calm unsettled him more than panic would have. "Looks like we're really stuck," he said, mostly to break the quiet, his tone flat and practical. He wasn't trying to be kind. He just needed something to happen. She nodded slightly and answered with a simple, "Yeah, seems that way," like this was just another unexpected pause in a long list of them. He asked if she was running late for something, not because he cared, but because that was the normal thing to ask. She told him she had an interview that morning. Nothing dramatic, just a fact. Marcus nodded once, already half back in his own thoughts, calculating how much time he was losing and what could still be salvaged. Minutes passed. The elevator didn't move. The air felt thicker. She adjusted the folder again and added, almost casually, that she wasn't exactly excited about the interview. That made him look up, not because of empathy, but because people didn't usually admit that, especially not to strangers. She explained, calmly and without apology, that she'd been unemployed for 3 months and that this interview wasn't about passion or dreams. It was about paying bills, about needing something stable. Marcus listened without reacting, his face unreadable, but something in the way she said it cut through the usual noise in his head. As she spoke, he realized how rarely he heard people talk that plainly about work. No ambition speeches, no pretending, just truth, the kind people usually kept to themselves. He still didn't know her name, and he didn't think this conversation mattered yet. But for the first time since the elevator stopped, he wasn't checking his watch. And somewhere between the quiet hum of the stalled elevator and the honesty of a stranger with nothing to impress, a small loop opened in Marcus's mind. Not a revelation, just a question, one he didn't realize would soon demand an answer. The elevator remained still, the kind of stillness that slowly forces people out of their private bubbles. Marcus shifted his stance and finally let his phone rest in his pocket, accepting that there would be no signal rescue. He looked at the woman again, not with interest exactly, but with the mild curiosity that comes when there is nothing else left to do. "So," he said, his voice neutral, "what kind of interview is it?" It wasn't warmth that made him ask. It was routine. She answered without hesitation, explaining it was for an administrative position, something steady, something behind the scenes. Her tone suggested no illusions, just practicality. Marcus nodded, already assuming the conversation would end there. But she surprised him by adding that she hadn't chosen the company. The company had chosen her. That simple reversal caught his attention. People usually framed work as a goal. She framed it as an outcome. She went on, explaining she'd done a quick search the night before. Nothing deep, just enough to feel prepared. The company seemed fine, she said. Stable, traditional, but not particularly exciting. She said this without judgment, like someone reading facts off a page rather than criticizing. Marcus raised an eyebrow slightly. "Not exciting how?" he asked, before realizing he cared enough to ask. The question slipped out naturally, without calculation. She paused, choosing her words carefully, not wanting to sound ungrateful. She explained that everything felt generic. The website, the language, the promises, it all sounded safe, but unclear. Like a place that had been running on momentum for years without asking where it was actually going. As she spoke, Marcus felt a quiet tightening in his chest he didn't expect. Then she said the thing that shifted the air between them. She mentioned she couldn't find any real information about who was leading the company. No interviews, no vision statement tied to a person, no sense of who was responsible for the direction everyone else was expected to follow. "When leadership is invisible," she said calmly, "decisions still happen. They just don't have a face." She shrugged slightly after saying it, as if it were a general observation, not a criticism. But Marcus felt it land with precision. That was the moment the conversation stopped being filler. The delay in the elevator stopped being a nuisance. Something had been nudged out of place, not dramatically, but enough to matter. Marcus didn't respond right away, and for the first time since the doors had closed, silence felt intentional. And as the elevator remained suspended between floors, a quiet loop opened between them. She had said something she thought was harmless. He had heard something he couldn't unhear. Neither of them knew yet that this single exchange had already pushed their lives onto a different track. The elevator lights flickered once, then stabilized, but the car itself remained frozen between floors, creating a quiet pressure that neither of them could ignore anymore. Marcus exhaled slowly and rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture he usually reserved for moments when plans slipped beyond his control. This delay was no longer just an inconvenience. It was starting to feel like a test of patience he hadn't prepared for. She shifted her weight slightly, not out of anxiety, but fatigue, the kind that settles in after weeks of uncertainty. Without being asked, she explained that she almost didn't come to the interview that morning, not because she didn't need the job, but because she was exhausted from hoping. She said it plainly, without drama, like someone stating the weather after too many storms. Marcus listened, arms crossed, his expression neutral, but his attention was no longer divided. She told him how every rejection email sounded the same, how silence was often worse than a clear no, and how being unemployed for months slowly eroded confidence even when skills hadn't changed. Her voice stayed steady, but the weight of her words filled the small space. She admitted that the hardest part wasn't the money, though that mattered, but the feeling of becoming invisible. Friends stopped asking how the search was going. Recruiters stopped replying. Days blurred together. She said it quietly, not looking for sympathy, just explaining the reality she was standing in. Marcus felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest, a discomfort that wasn't guilt exactly, but recognition. He had reviewed countless reports about workforce efficiency and restructuring, yet he'd never heard this part spoken out loud. The human aftermath usually lived in spreadsheets, not in real voices standing 3 feet away. He tried to ground himself by focusing on logic, reminding himself that companies couldn't be responsible for every outcome, that decisions had to be made at scale. But the more she talked, the harder it became to keep that distance intact. Her experience wasn't extreme or tragic. That was the problem. It was common. She mentioned her son briefly, explaining he was with her mother that morning so she could attend the interview uninterrupted. She smiled when she said it. Proud, protective, determined. There was no bitterness in her voice, only responsibility. Marcus noticed how that single detail shifted something inside him, anchoring her story to someone else who depended on her. The elevator remained unmoving, and the quiet returned, heavier now. Marcus realized he hadn't checked his watch in several minutes. The urgency of his meeting was still there, ticking away, but another urgency had crept in beside it, one he hadn't planned for and couldn't easily dismiss. As they stood there, suspended in that narrow space, both of them sensed the conversation had crossed a line it couldn't uncross. She had revealed more than she intended. He had heard more than he expected, and neither of them yet understood how deep this descent would go before the elevator finally moved again. Marcus felt his phone vibrate again in his pocket, not with urgency, but with the quiet insistence of a reminder he hadn't consciously registered earlier. When he pulled it out, there was no message waiting, no assistant asking where he was, just a calendar alert blinking back at him with a time and a single word: interview. He frowned, scrolling quickly, realizing he had never personally approved it, never even glanced at the candidate's name, which wasn't there anyway, only the position title and the scheduled slot. He slipped the phone back into his pocket without saying anything, but the shift inside him was immediate and unsettling. The woman beside him kept talking, unaware of what he had just seen, explaining how administrative roles often ended up becoming emotional shock absorbers for entire offices. She spoke about how secretaries noticed patterns, tension, and unspoken fear long before anyone in leadership did, simply because they were close enough to hear the pauses between words. Marcus found himself asking more questions, not abruptly, but steadily, as if something in him had decided this conversation was no longer optional. He asked what she believed made a workplace healthy, and she answered without hesitation, saying clarity mattered more than perks, and honesty mattered more than titles. Her words weren't revolutionary, but they were grounded, shaped by lived experience rather than theory. She explained that she wasn't looking for admiration or rapid growth, just stability and a sense that her work meant something beyond survival. She said it mattered to know who was leading, because leadership without visibility often meant accountability disappeared when things went wrong. Marcus listened closely, aware now that every sentence felt uncomfortably familiar. The elevator let out a low mechanical hum, a sound that suggested movement might return soon, but neither of them reacted to it. Marcus's attention was fully anchored on her now, not because he felt responsible for her situation, but because she was voicing concerns he had quietly avoided confronting in himself for years. This wasn't criticism, it was reflection. He thought about the meeting he was supposed to be in, the polished slides waiting on a screen, the careful language designed to soften difficult decisions. He realized that the conversation in the elevator felt more honest than anything he had prepared to say that morning. The contrast unsettled him more than the delay ever could. For the first time, Marcus wondered what it would mean to slow down rather than catch up. He wondered what he might learn if he listened instead of managing. The reminder on his phone wasn't just about an interview anymore. It was a marker, a quiet fork in the road he hadn't known was there. As the elevator finally began to move, he sensed that whatever waited beyond those doors would no longer unfold the way he had planned. Something had shifted, not loudly, but deeply, and the consequences of that shift were only beginning to take shape. As the elevator rose slowly toward the upper floors, Marcus felt the familiar instinct to reclaim control begin to surface. He straightened his posture, adjusted his jacket, and mentally reviewed the meeting he was supposed to be leading, reminding himself of the responsibility he carried. This was his world, his terrain, and stepping away from it even briefly felt like a risk he wasn't trained to take lightly. He spoke again, this time more guarded, explaining that leadership often required making decisions that didn't feel good, but were necessary for survival. He mentioned budgets, projections, and the pressure of keeping a company stable in an unpredictable market. His tone wasn't defensive, just firm, as if he were convincing himself as much as her. She listened carefully, not interrupting, not arguing, letting him finish before responding. When she did speak, she didn't challenge his logic. Instead, she acknowledged it, saying she understood that no company could function without hard choices. Then she added something quieter, explaining that the hardest part for people affected by those choices was not the loss itself, but the silence that followed. She described how being let go often came without explanation, without closure, leaving people to fill in the blanks with self-doubt. She said kindness in those moments didn't require reversing decisions, just recognizing the human weight behind them. Marcus felt the edge of his certainty soften, not because he disagreed, but because he realized how rarely that side of the story reached him. As the days unfolded, Marcus began to feel the cost of his choice in ways that didn't show up on balance sheets. The board requested explanations, and senior executives quietly questioned the delays through polite emails and carefully worded concerns about momentum. Marcus responded with patience, privately wrestling with the fear that slowing down might expose weaknesses he had spent years hiding. Instead of pulling away, he leaned in. He invited longer conversations, asked questions he would normally delegate, and listened even when answers complicated decisions. This wasn't comfortable. It demanded presence instead of authority. More than once, he felt the urge to retreat into numbers and forecasts. But each time, he remembered the stillness of the elevator and the clarity that came from listening. Lena noticed the shift immediately. She saw how his choices created space for others to speak and how meetings felt less performative and more honest. She supported him quietly, organizing information, anticipating concerns, and preparing him not just with data, but with context. There were moments when Marcus wondered if kindness would be mistaken for weakness. When a senior manager pushed back sharply, he held his ground without hostility, choosing explanation over authority. The room didn't erupt, it settled. That moment reminded him that strength didn't need to be loud. Through these deliberate actions, Marcus wasn't fighting anyone. He was fighting for trust, transparency, and the possibility that leadership could be both firm and humane. Lena, watching this unfold, understood that the bond forming between them wasn't transactional, but built on shared courage. Neither of them said it out loud yet, but they sensed the same truth. This wasn't just about fixing a system. It was about choosing to show up differently, even when it would have been easier not to. The elevator slowed, signaling they were nearing their destination. Marcus checked the floor indicator and realized they were approaching the 7th floor, where the reception area was located. His instinct told him to end the conversation politely and move on, to return to his role and let the day continue as planned. But instead of disengaging, he found himself lingering, asking one final question about what she hoped for if she got the job. She answered simply, saying she wanted to work somewhere that valued clarity and communication, where she didn't feel invisible. She wasn't asking for special treatment, just acknowledgement. The elevator doors opened on the 7th floor, revealing the reception area bathed in soft morning light. She thanked him for the conversation, offering a small, sincere smile before stepping out and heading toward the front desk. To her, this was just a brief exchange with a stranger, nothing more. Marcus remained inside as the doors closed again, pressing the button for the 8th floor. As the elevator ascended, he felt the weight of a choice settle in his chest. He knew he could continue with his day unchanged, or he could act on the unexpected clarity this conversation had brought him. By the time the doors opened to his office floor, he had already made his decision. Marcus stepped out of the elevator on the 8th floor with a decision already forming in his chest, one that felt heavier than the schedule he was about to disrupt. As he walked toward his office, his assistant started briefing him on the meeting that was supposed to begin in minutes, outlining key talking points and reminding him how many people were already waiting. He listened, nodded once, and then surprised her by asking her to cancel it entirely. She paused, clearly confused, and asked if he wanted to reschedule or delegate instead. Marcus shook his head and told her to clear the next hour completely, explaining that something more important had come up. He didn't elaborate, not because he was being secretive, but because he wasn't sure how to put into words what had shifted inside him during that elevator ride. In the interview room on the same floor, Lena sat quietly, her folder resting on her lap as she tried to steady her breathing. She assumed the delay meant the interviewer was running late, or that she'd been forgotten entirely, a familiar fear she'd grown used to pushing aside. She reminded herself that no matter what happened, she'd shown up, and that alone had to count for something. When the door finally opened and Marcus walked in, she recognized him immediately, her posture stiffening as realization washed over her. This wasn't just another executive. This was the man from the elevator, now seated at the head of the table, calm, composed, and unmistakably in charge. For a brief moment, she wondered if she'd said too much earlier, if honesty had finally cost her something. Marcus didn't introduce himself with a title right away. Instead, he thanked her for waiting and asked if she was comfortable before beginning. His questions weren't standard interview prompts pulled from a list. They were thoughtful, specific, and clearly shaped by the conversation they'd shared earlier, focusing on communication, clarity, and how she handled uncertainty. As the interview continued, Lena answered carefully but truthfully, choosing not to edit herself out of fear. She spoke about organization as a form of respect, about how small details could ease tension in a workplace, and about the quiet responsibility that came with supporting leadership. Marcus listened closely, recognizing a steadiness in her that no resume could fully capture. There was a moment of silence when the questions ended, a pause that felt heavier than any rejection she'd faced before. Marcus finally spoke, telling her he appreciated her honesty and that he valued the perspective she brought into the room. He explained that the role required someone exactly like her, someone who noticed what others missed and wasn't afraid to speak plainly. When he offered her the position, it didn't feel like a victory born of chance or sympathy. It felt earned, grounded in a connection neither of them had planned for. As Lena accepted, still processing